Hey, it's Marnie. It's Thursday, December 18 at 7:33 in the morning. I'm in the Winnipeg airport, trying to fly to Vancouver, but there's a blizzard going on. Visibility is nil.
I had moved back to Winnipeg from Toronto 3 days prior, and now was trying to go home to Abbotsford, BC, for the holidays. Problem was, nobody at YWG was going anywhere.
Everyone's on the phone, trying to figure out plans. There's nothing we can do. I'm having a crazy idea, and I might go do it.
Grabbing my bag, I marched over to the one shop that was open early and came out with a cardboard box with some words scrawled on the side, field recorder in hand.
It says, "Is there someone you disagree with but still hang out with?" If you have a story for me, I'm here until my flight decides it's time to go.
My whole family disagrees with me.
Do you want to tell me about them? Fair enough.
Not too many people were keen to talk to me. Lots of folks avoided eye contact. Until I met Thomas.
Someone in your life you disagree with but still spend time with?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to tell me about them?
I'm not sure. Personally, we have people in our life we don't necessarily agree with, but we meet all the time, and especially when it comes to church, over things, how to do something.
Thomas and I chatted for several minutes about his church group back in Munich, which had experienced a split and some attempted mending, to no avail.
Our movement started about 79, saying, hey, we need to do what Jesus says. We can't just go to church. First it worked, and then it became more like you can do that somewhere else.
Yeah.
We have had lots of conversations with people, and we got this close, and then there was one couple that said on their side, well, if you do that, then we're not willing to support. Work together. You have a guitar, and we don't allow that. Like when the Bible is full of instruments. It was very sad.
Thomas's story resonated with what I was already learning about the tense relationship between Mennonites and Mennonite Brethren, or MBs, in Canada. I was learning about the ways we talk to each other, both within our denominational silos, but also between and across. And I was curious about how we talk to each other and what that says about us.
We have a same example in a church in Munich, when then now for 10 years they are working together, worshiping together, building, and have been able to, work things out. And
surely there was hope for collaboration across denominational boundaries. Hope for us to work together across our differences. On today's episode, we're talking about how we talk to each other. I'm Marnie Klassen. Welcome to the schism between us.
He was almost 60 years with his first wife, and I was almost 50 with my first husband.
She makes us funny meals.
And he's so stuck in the old ways. just meat and potatoes, I think it only worked because we were people that were open-minded to begin with.
Yeah.
I met Mary Funk and Gilbert Brandt last fall. I was still living in Toronto, but had flown to Winnipeg to interview some folks. I was really interested in learning more about some of the inter-Mennonite communities supported by both the Mennonite and MB church denominations. I emailed the one I was most familiar with in Winnipeg, Jubilee Mennonite Church. The church administrator responded quickly, and long story short, I ended up in an email thread with Mary.
I was there from the beginning. Our two congregations that came together were Northdale Mennonite and Valley Gardens Community Valley Gardens Community Church, right? That's what you call yourself.
Yeah.
And Gilbert was very instrumental in starting off Valley Gardens. So maybe you can tell you that.
We were living in Valley Gardens, Susan and I, and we had 4 couples got together for some Bible studies, and then we decided to branch into a church without any real connection to the powers that be to tell us, yes, you can or can't. So we just went ahead and got space in a school.
Mary was part of planting Northdale Mennonite Church around the same time. It was an offshoot of Springfield Heights Mennonite, also in the North Kildonan area of Winnipeg.
And so there were some of us who said, okay, we need to plant another church, and English has to be the language because there are people in our congregation who no longer understand the German, young people and people who are marrying non-German speakers. Sure. And so we started that church in 1972. In 76, we started on the construction of the land that Jubilee now sits on. So we were a small congregation right from the beginning.
Things didn't work out quite the way they'd hoped, though, and the congregation couldn't fill the building.
There weren't as many people that came as we thought, or those that came eventually went back because they still loved to sing the German hymns. Mm-hmm. So the group kind of got smaller and smaller. And then there was one couple at Jubilee that had really good friends at Valley Gardens. Okay. And those 2 couples started talking and said, well, why don't we get together? You know, you've got a building here that isn't as full as it could be. And we are so tired of putting up chairs every Sunday. And I think by that time, Valley Gardens had been meeting for about 10 years, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Long story short, Valley Gardens MB Church and Northdale Mennonite Church joined forces to become Jubilee Mennonite Church, a congregation formally supported by both the Mennonite and Mennonite Brethren church denominations. While I sat with Mary and Gilbert on a Thursday morning, sunlight pouring into their living room, I wondered, what did it look like in practice for these 2 groups to come to a decision like that and actually join together?
So somewhere in 93, we started talking together. And throughout 1994, we pursued the courtship. And we would meet one Sunday in their space and one Sunday in our space so that we could get used to each other. And then we established a committee to look at this. So this was the engagement part. So we got this committee from representatives from each group, and we talked together about how is this going to work and what are our differences. We looked at our confessions of faith and talked about our practices and so on. And we sort of baptism was sort of where it came down to where the differences were. It was the form of baptism because the MBs practiced immersion and we practiced pouring.
Now, I want to pause here, because baptism as a point of contention between these groups was not new in 1994. Last episode, we heard from MB historian Bruce Gunther. When Bruce and I talked about the 1860 split, baptism was one topic that came up right away.
The baptism, the insistence on rebaptism and baptism by immersion, that was a severe point of conflict because it undermined the legitimacy, implicitly at least, and explicitly perhaps, the legitimacy of General Conference piety.
Bruce is talking here about the then new Mennonite Brethren Church and the ways they accepted new converts to the movement. Or didn't.
That was true also for Mennonite Brethren relations to other denominations, other Mennonite denominations. They would recognize and transfer Baptists, but they wouldn't recognize the membership and the baptism from other Mennonites. That dates back to Russia. So there was a kind of a spiritual elitism.
With this historical context in mind, I was encouraged to hear that, though it was still a live issue in the mid-90s, it was something Jubilee was able to figure out during the formation of their congregation.
But when we looked at the theology behind baptism, we said the same thing. Baptism was a symbol of a regenerated life. And so we said, well, then we'll just accept each other's symbols. And we put that right into our constitution, that either form of baptism would be acceptable because it was a form a symbol for what's really happening inside. And so throughout the years, we've had some people who request pouring and some people who want immersion. Usually it's the younger kids who like the immersion, and people who are older when they come to the church prefer the pouring. So we have said both forms are valid.
It was a beautiful story, one of reconciliation and honest collaboration. I wasn't sure what to expect when I first got connected with Mary, and this was turning out to be a pretty amazing conversation.
We met with the conference reps, the leadership of both conferences, and we had their blessing and so on. And so we did the official amalgamation. The marriage happened.
I love that.
Later, we found that there were, more subtle differences that we hadn't really talked about in the beginning.
Listening back on our conversation, I wonder what Mary meant by that. Was she referring, perhaps, to the ways we communicate, the ways we talk to each other? At some point in our conversation, it came up that Gilbert had worked for decades for Kindred Press, a prominent Mennonite Brethren publisher. And it turns out his late first wife, Susan, had been editor of the MB Herald. So naturally, we got talking about the ways that denominations talk to each other.
It's a few years now since the MB Herald moved online.
The MB Herald is the national publication of the Mennonite Brethren Church. I grew up reading the Herald. Well, I grew up reading the back page, birth announcements, and obituaries. In 2019, the Herald announced they were going out of print, moving solely into the digital realm.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that has affected the way people get information in the MB world?
Many people don't read it anymore.
Yeah.
Because now and then people say, there was an article in the Herald. And everyone says, oh. But the MB Herald changed from being controlled by the editorial board and being controlled by the executive board. And the executive board, it gives news that they want to share, information about what they're talking about. But there's no article that can challenge anything.
And I think that's a real picture of what has happened to the MB Church over the years.
As I was putting this episode together, I did a little digging. When had the Herald really made the shift away from being a conversation space for the church and towards being a mouthpiece for the brass? It turns out the Herald itself has documented what past editors have had to say about just that topic. In 2020, the Herald published an article called The Last Word, a series of quotations from previous editors reflecting on the 58 years of the MB Herald in print. I'll link the article in the show notes. Here's what Susan Brandt, Gilbert's late first wife and previous editor of the MB Herald, had to say, and I quote, "The MB Herald has been in my life since my young adult years. It was heartening to read about additions to churches, the impact of our schools and camps. Negative news was cause for prayer. Many columnists challenged our thinking and helped us come to consensus. In letters, anyone could express a concern or joy. When these features were replaced with conference promotional articles, interest waned and readership dwindled. With the Herald ceasing publication entirely, the bit of glue that held us together is gone. It is imperative that we strengthen the conference and retain its communication arm for the ongoing health of our churches." I was fascinated by this thread. It seemed that Mary could be right, that the ways denomination-wide communication had changed over the years in the MB Church was a reflection of changing power dynamics within the conference itself. I wanted to get a sense of how Canadian Mennonite magazine functions on the Mennonite Church Canada end of things.
Well, Canadian Mennonite has had an interesting relationship with the denomination.
That's Catherine Limburner, publisher of Canadian Mennonite.
We are a denominational magazine, but we also enjoy a bit of a separate and distinct privilege in that we exist alongside the conference. Our funding structure, money comes from the conference that supports us. And that has been part of the difficulty that we've had in our relationship with the denomination. Previous editors and publishers, going back a couple of decades at this point, there was some tension sometimes between the national denomination and the magazine. Sometimes when the denominational publication criticizes the denomination, it can feel very much like your sibling or your parent or child is like, shouting from the rooftops all the internal problems. We're working to improve the relationship so that everybody can feel like their voices are being heard, that the magazine is representative of who they are, and trying to be respectful of the funding structures as well, as still holding opportunity to criticize when it's warranted.
I asked Catherine whether she saw Canadian Mennonites' role as primarily about speaking from conference to people, or from the people back to the conference.
I think it's the third thing. We exist to reflect what's happening in the church. Grassroots, that's our job. Yeah, reflect the faith and talk about the future of the faith. There's a lot Canadian Mennonite does for being a living textbook of the faith.
As I listened to Catherine, I kept Mary and Gilbert and Susan Brandt in mind. The contrast was stark. Here was a denominational publication that was trying to have honest conversations about the life of the church. Sure, they did it imperfectly sometimes. I've heard my share of gripes with Canadian Mennonite. But in comparison to what had happened to the MB Herald, it seemed so real, refreshing. I felt grateful for the intentional funding structure at Canadian Mennonite that let their writers speak truth to power when necessary. But I also felt sad. Sad that the MB Herald I had grown up reading, filled with letters to the editor and commentary on the life of the church, was a thing of the past. We'll be right back after the break.
St. Stephen's University is a graduate school of theology, peace, and reconciliation, dedicated to cultivating students who wish to pursue justice, beauty, and compassion in our fractured world. Offering an array of certificate and master's degree programs in theology and culture, peace and justice and reconciliation studies, SSU programs are designed so students can upscale their education without ever needing to uproot their lives. Drawing on the wisdom of a broad spectrum of scholars and activists and theologians, students have the opportunity to engage firsthand with an array of guest lectures, including Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, Lisa Sharon Harper, Pete Enns, Oshita Moore, Brian McLaren, C.C. Jones Davis, Bradley Jerzak, Stanley Hauerwas, Shane Claiborne, and many more. So whether you've been in ministry for decades or are just starting out, if you want to deepen your theological reflection by asking the hard questions, or are looking to find pathways to pursue healing justice in your neighborhoods, SSU's learning community is open to you. Applications are now open for all of SSU's programs. Classes begin in September. For more information, visit us at ssu.ca or email info@ssu.ca.
I always loved the worship. That's something that is very different from the Mennonite Church.
That's Carolina Govea Santana. Carolina and I have known each other for a few years. But after I heard her share at last year's Mennonite Church Canada National Gathering, I knew I needed to talk to her about inclusion and exclusion in the church.
But they're different.
They
You have to love them
different.
differently.
Yes. They're different, and just like so much music, so much rhythm, and people not really singing very well, but like everybody just giving their soul to the music. And it's beautiful, and it gets you very emotional, which can be something that people criticize you, but it's also it's a great feeling to feel that emotion from music.
Carolina grew up in the Mennonite Brethren Church in Brazil and moved to Canada initially to work with community peacemaker teams. Then she fell in love with a Mennonite and stayed.
Like the Christmas service was always full of excitement. We all had presentations to do. We would have we would write plays. We would spend like hours just writing plays, and then we would do the acting, and we would try to adapt to other plays that we saw. And it was such an excitement. People laughing. We always tried to make it funny. So I think that those beautiful memories that I have is just like being really hot and us in clothing and just trying to do all the acting and trying to see like, are people laughing, are people enjoying, are people like, and that brought a passion for acting. And I think that it helps me to speak.
Carolina had a really good experience growing up in the Brazilian MB church. She didn't join the Mennonite Church in Canada as a way of running away. She just went to the church that made sense, given her new context. Being part of the Mennonite Church in Canada hasn't always been easy, though.
But when I go to church, I can count how many people of color are there. Mm-hmm. I want to be in a church where I don't feel like, wow, there's only white people here.
Carolina is not the only person of color to feel out of place in the Mennonite Church. Unfortunately, in a church culture that has been shaped by the migration story of an ethno-religious group of white folks, people of color are still often the minority in Mennonite churches.
Because I came here connected to the Mennonite Church with CPT, community peacemaker teams, and then I end up marrying to a Mennonite family, and I go to a Mennonite church. Basically all my friends are Mennonite, or they're somehow connected to the Mennonite Church. And there are many situations where I walk into a group of friends and I feel like, why I don't belong here.
I'm encouraged by Carolina's positive experience of her MB upbringing in Brazil. And when she talks about the music, it feels like common ground. Last November, while I was in Winnipeg for interviews, I drove with my friend Nadia south to Altona, Manitoba. Nadia was preaching that Sunday at a Mennonite church called Seeds, and I was curious about the congregation. One of the people I was planning to interview later that same week was Paul Peters. I'd learned who Paul was years earlier while he was working for Canadian Mennonite University, or CMU, and I was a student there. But we'd never spoken. Lo and behold, there he was at Seeds. We had a super engaging conversation, which I so wish I had gotten on the record. A few days later, we met up on CMU's campus in Folio Cafe.
I mean, what am I actually doing? I mean, I work for CMU, and a lot of my work is in church relations and alumni relations, building and or rebuilding relationships with churches. A lot of my focus has been in the rural community.
That's Paul. We'd been sitting down for coffee for less than 10 minutes, and Paul was ready to go.
Very quickly, some of what became evident is, I'd say it probably started, obviously the MB and Mennonite Church split decades ago. But there continued to be, the differences didn't get smaller, they only got bigger. And that isn't just between the MB and the Mennonite Church, that's between Mennonite churches, that's between churches that have left the Mennonite Conference and still in the Mennonite Conference, that's between MB churches that are no longer a part of the conference. Like, somehow our differences are very evident. And I think in the rural community, how do I say this? There's a bit more of a traditional understanding, probably.
Paul, like me, spends his time in the spaces between Mennonites and MBs, between rural and urban folks, between people who disagree. His work with CMU is to hold conversations with churches, to get curious, and to build relationships. He's been learning a lot.
As you're sitting there, you're realizing, wow, okay, there's something between the MB church and the Mennonite church that isn't working. Not only is it not working, it's where maybe we were 10 feet apart 50 years ago. Now maybe we're 100 feet apart. And there's been changes, but a lot of the core would still be there. And so for me, it just became a curiosity of, okay, why? And I mean, we could harp on specific theological changes. I actually don't think that's the problem. And that's why I love what you're doing, because I think we've spent so much time talking about theology and I mean, key differences. I mean, initially it would have been baptism.
Yeah.
And alcohol was a big one. Sexuality, gender identity, women in leadership. And what's actually happening, I have come to believe that we have made ourselves out to be further apart than we are. We have made ourselves feel like we are more distant. And so part of the approach in entering some of the spaces where we weren't sure where people stood, how do you feel about CMU? My approach was to just walk in with pure curiosity. So it was to change the posture of, if somebody shares a story about something that they're uncomfortable with, my job wasn't to defend why they shouldn't be uncomfortable. It was actually to understand what made them uncomfortable. And that posture, I think in short term, doesn't make things easier. In short term, like,
It's just still hard.
it's still just hard. Like, short term, does it mean everything's smoother and easier? No, not at all. It maybe even means things are harder. Long term, I would say I'm led to believe that a curious posture will always bring us closer and will always set the table in a different way. And a curious posture doesn't assume one has it better than the other. And I think we've entered this where non-intentionally, maybe in some cases intentionally, there have been moments and experiences where churches have become led to believe that we've got it figured out, and you don't.
Paul suggests, essentially, a return to humility. We talk for a while about what it looks like and feels like to enter a space assuming both that you have something to offer and that you have something to learn. Turns out, this has been a key idea for both of us.
And that posture is an uncomfortable posture, like on no matter what side you're on. It breaks down opportunity for real relationship, because it offers power to the ego in a different way than humbly saying, tell me more.
I'm thinking about Carolina and other friends of color in the church as we talk. Interestingly, Paul takes the conversation there first.
Somehow I think we're very good at it when somebody is visibly or obviously different than us, be it a belief system, be it culturally, ethnically. Like, somehow then we can be curious. I travel somewhere, I can enter a new country and be very curious, even if I disagree wholeheartedly with something. But when somebody looks like us, thinks really close to us, what does that mean?
It's an interesting distinction. We already know that people of color don't always find belonging in predominantly white church spaces. But Paul's idea that we might actually be better at facing that kind of visible difference intrigues me. I start to wonder, when we're faced with people who look like us but are actually different from us, how do we think about them? How do we talk to them? How do we talk about them?
And we haven't learned. I think sometimes the finger always wants to be pointed at, the other is, they're not willing to sit at the table. Am I actually setting the table though? Like, have I set the table? Forget thinking about the other. Start thinking about, what am I actually doing?
Have I set the table? Seriously, I wonder. In what ways am I expecting the quote-unquote other to arrive at a table I haven't even pulled up a chair to? I think Paul's right. We're pointing fingers at each other, but we're not doing our own work to get curious. How do we talk to each other? I guess it has to start by pulling up a seat to the table.
And the stranger, Christ the other. May God's Spirit hover over our chaos, our hatred and indifference. Descend in our hearts with love and pleasure. Blow us out into the world to listen and serve. and set us ablaze to forgive and reconcile. For all are welcome at the table of God, every human.
Thank you for listening to The Schism Between Us. I'm your host, Marnie Klassen. This series is supported by Menno Creative, a program of Canadian Mennonite Magazine. Special thanks to Susan Fish for her ongoing support. I could not have told this story without the help of some very special folks. At the beginning, and again now, you've heard an arrangement of In the Rifted Rock, arranged by Michaela Turner and performed by Marta Bonnet-Wiebe, Allegra Friesen-Epp, Matthew Veith, Solomon Schlegel, Courtney Kuhl-Schlegel, and Isaac Kuhl-Schlegel. Some of the other sounds and music you've heard throughout were composed and recorded by Jamie Terpstra, others by Matthew Veith. Graphic design by Tiff Wu. A special thanks to my technical producer, Matthew Veith. Thank you to all of these colleagues and friends, without whom this project would still be just an idea. And thank you, dear listener, for listening. Catch you next time.